Hello and welcome to the Junkyard Love.
Hey, everything's gonna be alright.
It's all good. It's all good.
The Junkyard Love podcast.
The title of your book is called Am I Bipolar or Waking Up?
Hang on. That's the first book.
The first book, okay.
Well,
What's the
first
second
book
one?
is Am I Bipolar or Waking Up? Second book is Bipolar Awakenings. Okay. And so maybe we talk about both books. We've got some time.
Yeah.
But yeah, the second book, Bipolar Awakenings, will have more implications for your listeners.
Okay.
You know.
Okay. So
we can start with Am I Bipolar or Waking Up? It's a good place to start.
I mean, I think it's probably all going to weave into each other. Where I would like to start is I would like to bring in, so if say somebody's tuning in and they don't really know much about bipolar, maybe we've heard this term, maybe they've heard of someone who's been bipolar. Maybe the most they know about bipolar is someone who's like, well, I don't know, they seem really happy and then suddenly they're really ticked off. You know, the very thin explanation of bipolar. So can you tell me, I guess, let's just start with what is bipolar for someone who's just learning this?
Okay. So bipolar disorder is like all mental disorders in the big book of mental disorders, the DSM, Diagnostical Statistical Manual. It's a label given to a set of symptoms. Okay. So there's no actual disease there that they can find biologically. Okay. There's just a set of symptoms. And what most people think of as bipolar disorder, they would label Bipolar II, which goes hypomania and depression. So what's hypomania? Hypomania tends to be symptoms like not sleeping very well, nonstop or incessant speech, a lot of business ideas, sometimes hypersexuality, sometimes some hyperaggressiveness, and it just kind of feels like, for the outsider, it just feels like you're just dealing with an extremely difficult person, okay? And that's the mania side of things. Spending lots of money, bad investments, these kind of things too. Then it flips to the depression, okay? So you've got this high, lots of energy, spending lots of money, do all these activities, driving everybody crazy. And then there's the depression side where everybody calms down, but you're miserable, right? So that's Bipolar II. Bipolar I is when that hypomania goes into psychosis and you have a complete break with reality and you enter a space where you kind of feel like you're dreaming, right? And back in the 80s, that usually is labeled, anybody back in the 80s who got acute psychosis, it would have been labeled schizophrenia. But somehow along the way, the labels got shifted around. And most people going into acute psychosis today get the label of Bipolar I. So Bipolar I with psychosis, Bipolar II, just the hypomania. And then both have the depression on the other side.
Okay. And so that's the definition as broadly as the culture knows,
Clinical
right?
thing. Yeah.
Okay. And then you seem to have discovered different definitions, or you seem to have expanded more on it. So I guess what would be kind of your definitions?
Yeah. So it's not so much that I disagree with that definition. Like if somebody has those symptoms, I'm like, okay, this guy's in that bipolar space for sure. But what are the roots is the big difference. And according to psychiatry, the roots are biological, and like all the DSM diagnoses, they tend to say that it's either genetic, and then they point to too much or too little dopamine or serotonin. But the science shows that, and this comes from Robert Whitaker. He's a writer for the Boston Globe who has taken on this mission. He has a website, madinamerica.com. And what the science shows is that the range of serotonin and dopamine are the same for people with mental disorders as they are for normal people. So while there is biological shifts happening, there is no inherent genetic basis for a mental disorder. And then actual mental illnesses that take place usually involve memory loss, things like Alzheimer's, dementia, these kind of things. You have problems in remembering things, okay? Mental disorders or mental illness doesn't take you into non-ordinary states of consciousness per se, all right? like what you go into in psychosis. Okay. So my perception in talking to people, and I have to go back to my own experience for this, but what I believe and how I practice things is that mental disorders, particularly bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, because there's a lot of gray area between those two, and depression, have roots in trauma, and that the trauma is somehow lodged in our inherent bioenergetic system. Now, in the East, they could call this system the chakra system, or maybe the Kundalini system, subtle body. And Kundalini is like your life force energy. In China, they might call it Qi or Qigong. You might have heard of Qigong, the Qi and Qigong. So you've got this life force coming through you. And then there's these blockages rooted in trauma. And when those blockages become too much, then that can cause a non-ordinary state experience, like going into psychosis, But the roots of depression are the same and that kind of thing. And then when you go into these non-ordinary state experiences, there's only about 13 very spiritual delusions that pop up. And that's it. There's like 13 of them. And then there's, if a lot of fear comes over you, there's also paranoia that can creep in too. And hallucinations are part of this as well, sometimes with more severe situations. But for the most part, we're talking about 13 delusions that are obviously very spiritual.
Okay. So you said obviously very spiritual. One thing I found from my personal experience was it took me a while to even let words like spiritual into my vocabulary. I didn't consider myself someone spiritual. And so like any of that stuff, I kind of just had it's not really for me. And it took me a while to kind of actually start comprehending those. I'm at a completely different place now. This is many years ago. But could you... I'm just thinking of someone who's listening. Maybe they've experienced some sort of bipolar things, or they have someone in their life. Maybe they're in that same boat that I was in years ago. Could you maybe expand more on the word spiritual? What might that mean to that person?
Okay. Well, yeah. And according to Ken Wilber, there are 12 different definitions for spiritual or spirituality. So when one person speaks about spiritual or spiritual things, it can be interpreted completely differently than somebody else, So there's a lot of confusion around that topic. But just to get very practical and tangible, when I'm talking about spiritual delusions, and I made a video about this on YouTube, my most popular video from years ago was called Why You Think You're Jesus. People go into bipolar disorder and they think that they are in psychosis. They think they are either the reincarnation of Jesus, giving birth to Jesus, they're a Messiah, they're Buddha, there's some sort of figure here to save the world, And so that's like one of the strongest delusions that happen. It's like of the sort of otherworldly domain, you might say. And what I see in that case is people getting in touch with the divine within themselves, Now, conversely, also spiritual, and often these days people don't think of it as spiritual, you can also have a demonic side to this whole thing. It tends to be projected most of the time, like it's because it's more fear-oriented, but you can think often like the devil or demons are after you. It can manifest as aliens that are kind of evil, aliens kind of following me around or performing a surgery on me or something like that. Or you can even think that you're the devil. And some people think that they'll tell me that they thought they were the Jesus 1 minute and the devil the next. And because what's going on is the energies are kind of flipping inside of you. You're getting in touch with one, and then it turns and gets in touch with the others. Because in this state, your ego has broken down, and your psyche is just running free reign without control. You've really got no control in that situation.
Yeah. It makes me think of. Are you familiar with Ram Dass, the spiritual teacher?
Sure.
Yeah. He has this story where he tells. Essentially, he had a brother. And his brother was actually in like a psychiatric ward, and he would visit his brother, and he would talk about his brother was in that same position. He thought he was Jesus, like he would just at all times. And it's funny, Ram Dass would talk about, here I am as this person. I've been Nepal and India, and I got a beard and I have these mala beads and I'm wearing like robes essentially, you know. I look more like Jesus than my brother does, and he sanely goes to visit his brother, and him and his brother get in some sort of quarrel, and the final marker that Ram Dass puts on the conversation is he tells his brother, like, the problem is that you think you're Jesus and I know that we're all Jesus. And it's kind of this like, it's not necessarily about just the self. Like, there is some truth in what you're feeling. There is kind of this, with spirituality, you have to allow paradox, though. It's not just this. Like, you may feel that you are having these, godlike experiences and downloads or whatever, but it's not that you are the one special person out of 8 billion people who gets these. It's kind of like a human experience. So anyway, Ram Dass mentions that, and I think that's I always thought that was a really good teaching on that one.
Right, and it's a good indicator also of how severe is a difficult word, but how severe the disorder is by how attached and how concrete the interpretation is of what the person is going through. So if you get somebody back on medications, for example, and then they're like, I thought that I was some sort of a Jesus figure, you know, speaking of it in sort of abstract or vague ways, right? Versus, you don't understand, I'm here to save the world, you know. And that kind of person who is just there, I am the only Messiah, that Jesus, and you need to respect me and bow down to me. Wow, that's a very difficult person to heal, you know, or to help heal. But the first one who was like, I'm pretty sure I thought I was Jesus for a while, but now I kind of get it. And, you know, they're taking a couple of medications and that person you can help if they've got insight into their situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Sean. Well, if you'll give me, I would love to back up a little bit. So I heard a inkling earlier. I was listening to you on a podcast, and you were talking about one of your first experiences into kind of the spiritual realm, and in what kind of started you down this path. You were at a landmark forum, and you had kind of a profound experience. Could you break that down to me? And could you also just bring in anybody who's new? What's landmark? What were you doing there? What were you trying to accomplish? Any of that?
Sure. And just to tell any of your listeners, this story I tell in my first book, and it's available as a free PDF on my website. Okay. Am I Bipolar or Waking Up is the PDF.
I'll have the link down below as well.
Okay, great. So what happened to me is I was dealing with about 7 years of on again, off again depression, but for me, it was always around my career, you know, just struggling with my career. But finally, someone convinced me to go take this course, the Landmark Forum, Landmark Education. And at the time, I didn't know anything about it, but it was rooted in something from the 70s called EST training. And it's just a very confrontational weekend where they really kind of get in your face about who you are and what you're about and how you're sabotaging your life and really messing with you psychologically. But because there's 150 people in the room together, energetically, it's a really strong thing too. Like, I was going to the bathroom and, pardon my French, farting. Like, I have never passed gas like this in my entire life. Every break we had, I had to go into the bathroom and process internally what the hell was going on. Like,
farting
it was
for
really,
everyone.
It was really uncomfortable, and I've never had an experience like that since. Okay.
It's so funny.
Yeah, but and they controlled things, like they told you had to promise you will not go to the bathroom while we're in session. Like, you won't just get up and walk out the door. You needed to wait for breaks, and if you couldn't agree to that, you had to leave the course. Like, they wanted everybody on the same page, you know. So they created almost like a cult-like environment where you needed to buy in or you're out the door, you know. Second day of that course, though, they asked us to do a meditation on our fear. And I didn't think I felt any fear. I was 30 years old at the time. Didn't think I felt any fear. And then in the middle of this meditation, I saw a depth gauge from my scuba diving equipment from Vancouver 2 months earlier. And I had a scuba diving accident. I lost my weight belt about 90 feet below sea level. Okay. And there was a moment there where I'm looking at my depth gauge and I'm just wondering if I'm going to die before I hit the surface, because I lost my weight belt. I'm shooting up to the surface from 90 feet below. I'm just watching this thing and I'm exhaling, wondering if I'm going to make it to the top. Um, and I couldn't allow myself to feel any sense of panic or fear in that moment, because if you did and you held your breath, that could create an air embolism and you could die. So I was just very relaxed. I just stayed relaxed until I hit the surface. But then on that fear meditation, I just had this huge punch in my chest and just started bawling. And then all the fear came up and I could feel everything and I was shaking. And they were encouraging us to go into deeper fear imagery. I imagined myself sort of being kidnapped and this kind of thing. Once that was over, my senses had completely shifted, and I felt like there was a sense of oneness, connection to everything, lighter. I felt like I knew things about life that I didn't know before. Like before, I always felt like I was missing something. All of a sudden, it was okay. And then my senses sharpened. So I could see detail in curtains I couldn't see before, smelling things I couldn't smell before. It was just everything was more vivid. And then I got really emotional. And this state carried on for about 5 days. And it takes about 80 pages of my book. And then on the 5th day, I was still on the course, and I came to this conclusion that I must have died in that scuba diving accident, because I felt so completely different, that this is what heaven feels. Yeah, I was in the course thinking, this is what it feels like when you die. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, that's what happened. I'm dead.
Wow.
And I just thought everybody in the room were actors that were just there to play a role to help me move along in my life and to move along to the next level. And I eventually went into this other room, this other ballroom, because it was all taking place at a ballroom for this final night. And I just thought I was going there to meet God. And part of it was taking off all my clothes. And also I peed on the carpet there. It was all like a test. I had to let go of everything. So I let go of my bladder too.
Wow.
And eventually the police showed up, and I wouldn't put my clothes back on because I thought this was part of the test. And they grabbed me and put me in an ambulance and took me to the hospital. And I still thought I was going to nirvana or heaven or something. I was trying to get to that other dimension. I was sure I was dead. But then a couple of days after being in the hospital, I started to realize nothing was changing, and my delusion actually started to break down just by the fact that I was still in the hospital and people weren't particularly nice to me.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this is, I don't know what's going on. My family was very supportive while I was in the hospital. They were devastated, but they were very supportive. When I got home, I still had this feeling like, I'm having a spiritual experience. I don't know what a mental disorder is. I don't know what bipolar disorder is or schizophrenia, but I had a spiritual experience. And part of it is the spiritual delusion, the common one, feeling like you're dead, dying, or being reborn. That's one. Feeling like you're being tested by God is another very common one. And then another common one for people is feeling like they're on a special mission here to save the world. But I didn't have that one because I was dead, right? Like I was moving on. So all this happened in 1996. I want to make that clear to people. And it, after I had a few months to integrate, and I had a family friend who was very understanding and would listen, was a great listener. She was from India, so she had more of an open mind than some of the others. And once I had that time, I went back to work in advertising, which is what I used to do. And my life got a lot better. My salary tripled, in 3 years. People said they really appreciated me on their business. They felt like I really cared, these kind of things, Even while at that point, I wanted to get out of the business. I needed to find some sort of spiritual mission, And after being in advertising for a year, I met a Brazilian woman on a trip to Peru. I had a dream I was being called to Peru, and I just kind of went on a tour. There's a lot of details there, but I met her on a tour, and eventually we got married and we moved to Brazil. Okay. And so then I became an English teacher here, and my life got much better. My years as an English teacher were probably the best years of my life. And that took me sort of between 2000, when I got married, to 2007, you know. And but up that whole time, I wasn't really involved in this work. I thought that spiritual emergency and mental disorder were two completely different things in that period. You
Right.
know?
Right. Okay. So going into this, what was your two questions? What was your background and experience in kind of like psychosis, bipolar? Like, were you familiar with even that language? And then also, did you have how
Oh,
about
okay.
the language of spirituality? Were you spiritual before? Did you grow up with any sort
Yeah.
of like Christian background, anything like that, or
Well, I was raised Catholic, and
okay?
I had a strong interest in spirituality. I studied religion in university. I
Mm.
was actually trying to find the right one, which didn't end too well, and I ended up being kind of atheistic or agnostic. And that had broken a few years earlier,
Mm.
with a trip to Vancouver, where I started to have like synchronicities popping and things like this, and it sort of opened me up to a faith in something bigger than myself. And this happened 2 years before I was in the hospital. So one thing I forgot to mention was that a year after my hospitalization, I discovered the work of a guy named Czech psychiatrist named Stanislav
Mm.
Grof, and he had written a book, The Stormy Search for the Self, which talked about spiritual, a kind of thing that looks like psychosis, but is actually spiritual in nature. And if you let it just play out, it can be very healing. And
Mm.
he called that a spiritual emergency. And I had all the details on a spiritual emergency. And basically, to keep it really simple, he broke it down to, if you're able to internalize what you're going through, it can be a breakthrough. But
Mm.
if you externalize it, it's a breakdown, but he separated it into two very different categories. But for me, coming out of that, I was like, oh, I had a spiritual emergency. I did not have a mental illness, and these are two very separate things.
Mm.
And I didn't even have any interest in bipolar disorder. I didn't know anything about mental disorders. I didn't think about them. Once I was back to work, it was like, okay, let me go live my life and find my true calling. You know.
Mm. So did you feel? Did you? I mean, this is a hard word, but normal. Did you feel normal afterwards? Like what was your homeostasis after
No.
this episode? Like, did you feel like a completely different
Oh.
person still, kind of, or?
I didn't feel normal. I felt natural. I felt a lot more
Mm.
natural.
Mhm.
And I was also a little weird. I think I would be prone to sort of breaking social convention more often than not. Maybe I was always like that a little bit, but then afterwards I was kind of a little bit more. So I just wasn't playing by the typical rules, you might say. But I kind of lost interest in society to a certain degree. For the years I was in Toronto after my hospitalization on Saturday nights, for example, I just stay home with my parents. I had no interest in going out and socializing that much. I felt like I had this secret, you know, because I couldn't really share it with anybody at work, that I was just 6 months before joining this ad agency, I was in the psychiatric
Yeah.
hospital. You couldn't
Keep
really
that to yourself. Yeah.
yeah, and but then I got interested in shamanism, a kind of a new age shamanism, and there was a few events around Toronto. That's where I'm originally from, and I would go to a few events here and there. And then I got into this trip to Peru, and that was just a fascinating thing to do. And my wife and I met my wife in Peru, Leisha, and we got married, and in 2000 we took a big trip through her country of Brazil, backpacked all over the place, and went and
Mm.
visited shamans and pages, they would call them, all over the Amazon and places like that. And just seeing in Salvador, Bahia, and
Mm.
seeing, the descendants of slaves in Salvador, channeling spirits, channeling African gods and stuff
Oh
like this.
wow.
So I was really getting an incredible exposure to the variety of experience you get in Brazil, both from religious and spiritual perspectives,
Yeah.
because it runs the whole gamut down there. And a lot of non-ordinary state experience stuff happens with drugs and without drugs.
Right.
Yeah, so it was a fascinating place to be when you were interested in spirituality like I was at the time.
Yeah. And so it sounds like, and you hadn't written your first book by this point, right?
No,
So
nothing.
it
This
sounds
was
like this is
2011, 2000, 2001. Yeah.
and when did your first book come out?
2011.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like
Good.
you were getting a lot of info and new, stories, and you're probably learning a lot about this whole thing and about yourself, right?
Yeah. And actually, I had written about my hospitalization and given it to a psychologist in the Toronto area just a few years after it had happened to me. But I never published it. I just kind of kept it in the back burner. But then once I got into this work about helping people, then I published it as Am I Bipolar or Waking Up in 2011.
And so how'd you make that move into like, all right, I want to start helping people. I feel that I have enough knowledge about what happened to not only me, but now I can help other people. How'd you take that step?
I was, other than learning learning about my own experience through the work of Stan Groff and Ken Wilber as well, I was just maybe looking for a calling, but I didn't know how to help people. I was involved in shamanism in Brazil. Sometimes I'd work as like a dog soldier, which would be like giving people water or something like that. That's what they called it, right?
Mm.
But in 2007, my wife's younger niece, Anna, and that's important to point out because it wasn't genetic. It was her niece. It wasn't mine.
Mm.
She went into an experience. We just got a call out of nowhere, and she went into experience, and her parents were telling us what happened. And I was like, well, that sounds like what happened to me. And we went to support her through it. And it was very close to what I had been through. And I thought, oh, well, this is a spiritual emergency. And I talked to the parents and tried to explain to the parents what happened to me. I'd never told the family what had happened to me. Not that side of the family. They're very conservative. But I thought I need to get the fear out of that place because the fear is what can really do damage. So I really focused on that. And my wife would support her niece. And we had good results. The psychiatrist and psychologist both said they had never seen someone recover so quickly than she did, but they still gave her the meds. And I was like, well, why are they giving her the meds? And then they said, oh, it's going to be a few months of meds. And I was like, a few months. And then I got online and learned it's going to be a lifetime of medication. And that's where I just went, what the hell are we talking about here? It was just totally new news to me, And then I started to go deeper and I started ordering books on Amazon and discovered that actually there were pioneering psychologists in the 70s that went past the work of Stan Groff that said that like they didn't deal with the concept of spiritual emergency like he did. They were saying that psychosis itself, acute psychosis, is an intended reorganization of the psyche. That's what's really going on. And so if you could support that reorganization without meds and just a lot of patience, they can come through. And there were places like a clinic called Soteria House where they would just practice being with people as opposed to doing something to them. And they were reporting an 85% recovery rate with people in their first break. Okay. And that was very important. So yeah, they were sending people home just after a week's stay of, taking care of them and being very supportive. And that was like a huge eye opener, that was a huge eye opener. And that got me really like, oh, well, I think I can do this. I think I can do this.
Yeah. Yeah. So you found in that situation, you were able to bring, knowledge and wisdom and a perspective to your niece that nobody else in that environment seemed to be bringing. Like, did it seem that the doctors that were, they're there to help her, but if they're not trained or they don't know any of this stuff, or they think it's all kind of woo-woo, spiritual, weird stuff that has nothing to do with this, biology or, the chemical imbalance, that whole thing, that whole story that keeps getting repeated. Wow. Yeah. How incredible. So how were people receptive to you when you were bringing this stuff up? Were people letting you like explain these things, or did you feel you had to, keep your mouth closed in doctors' offices, or what?
It was a bit of a battle. And what happened was, after doing 4 months of research into these pioneering psychologists, I was going to go back to the family and say, look, let's take her off the medications. If she goes back into psychosis, we'll support her through it. Like I'm learning about, you can do this with this Soteria House method of being versus doing. And just as I was ready to go back to the family, her sister came back from Europe and went into psychosis.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. 4 months apart, two sisters with no psychiatric history, went into non-ordinary states. It's
Wow.
unbelievable. Yeah. And she knew what happened to her younger sister. So I call them Anna. They're fake names, but Anna, the younger sister, Eliana, the older sister. Eliana came to us first. And we supported her. We didn't even tell her parents we had her. And we supported her right through her first psychosis, took her back to the family. She was still ungrounded, but she wasn't kind of crazy, okay? And then she had a second episode that we couldn't help her with, and she was medicated. But then she only agreed to go on, stay on the meds for 2 weeks. And when she went off the meds, she went into psychosis again, and we had agreed with the family that we would support her for that third time. And we did. And it didn't take long. And then she was able to go back to university, medication free, completely grounded, finished the year with honors, went off to an amazing job and worked in 11 different countries.
Oh, wow.
And eventually did a master's degree. Now, 7 years in the future, it would start to come up again. Okay. So it'd start to come up again. But we got her through university, and she'd had those 7 years medication free. And because we got her grounded, and we knew we got her grounded right away in the beginning, then it was like, well, this is my life mission. This is what I have to do.
Yeah.
And
no
this
doubt.
thing that I thought was a 1 in 20,000 kind of experience, like what I had, all of a sudden I was realizing it was more like 1 in 20, because bipolar disorder apparently affects 5% of people. So I was like, wow, this is a 1 in 20. This isn't a 1 in 20,000. And that got me going, we'll put it that way. And that's really the whole story of the first book, spoiler alert.
Yeah. Wow. No, it sounds fascinating. And definitely, again, you have the PDF. We linked it below. It sounds, even just hearing about your 80 pages worth in the landmark form, I'm curious to read more about that. So, wow, that's so incredible. I mean, what a, I think we could bridge us into like the talk of synchronicities and coincidences in general. Where do you, because it sounds like in this, there's, those are synchronistic things. Those are coincidences to me in some strange way. Like, how do you, where do you, this is an impossible question, I know, but where do you kind of draw the edge? Where's the sanity when it comes to synchronicity and coincidences? Because, when I was in the, impossible question, right? But these days I feel very sane and grounded in my spirituality in these sorts of experiences. But I still have times where, there's a couple weeks, a couple months where I have these synchronistic, coincidental instances, but compared them to my synchronistic, coincidental instances back, when I was a bit more ungrounded, they were very, if I try to explain them to someone in a logical manner, I just kind of sounded off the wall. Like it really would not make any sense. Whereas now I think I could be able to explain those things and they feel personal to me, and I could articulate them to someone else where, it's like, hey, this is part of my spiritual experience. But anyway, so I guess where do we draw the edge of sanity in synchronistic coincidences?
It's tricky. I told the family, I said, one of the things I had to struggle with when I came back from the hospital was, is this real or am I dreaming? And they said, when did you figure it out? And I said, I never did. I just got used to it. And what I meant was, it's like, we think we're in some sort of a firm or fixed reality here with logical reasoning and stuff like that. But then every once in a while, we have kind of dreamlike material kick in, which is what you're talking about, synchronicity. I mean, when that happens, there are times when it's actually impossible what just happened, I tell a story in my second book where I had a dream, and it's a long story, but part of it is I had a dream in I think it was about 2016, August 2016, about seeing myself falling at a distance. I was watching myself falling into a jungle canopy. And I was wondering if I had actually, when I woke up, I wondered if I had entered into a new parallel universe of some kind, like had my reality really shifted in a way. 8 months in the future, so March of 2017, I go with a client, we're in Mexico, and we go see King Kong Skull Island together. It was like a little break from our retreat work. And the opening scene, is the silhouette of a man falling into a jungle canopy with the sun behind him.
Wow.
So I had seen the entrance to that movie 8 months earlier, and I was telling the client's mother the story of that dream just before we went into the movie theater.
Whoa.
Yeah, and she popped up and said, "Sean, your dream." And I said, "Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I don't know what to do with this.
yeah, what do I do with this? It's just too much, you know." So I think life has a dreamlike quality like that, and also our dreams have a kind of a reality quality, like they impact us more than we think we do.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned shamans. Back in the day of shamans, it was a very important. I'm sure if they projected into the future and they learned that we kind of just ignore those 8 hours where we go to a different plane of reality every night, it's not really a thing in our culture. It's like, I had this crazy dream. It was crazy anyway. What are you having for breakfast this morning? You know, but I think back in the day, I think there was sects of humans that used the dream world maybe just as much as the regular world.
Yeah. The difference for them, though, what I've learned, because I've studied a lot of this stuff, is they really looked at the dream world as another reality, like this one, you know? So, for example, if you dream that your best friend is having sex with your girlfriend, it happened. And you're going to go talk to your friend about it. Like, you know, it's serious.
Yeah.
But the level of importance is kind of equal. You know, the interpretations are different, but for me, my dream world is very important, and it's part of the therapeutic work I do, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm trying to think of, so say the listener right now, this is probably all super interesting to someone who's in this boat, but say that maybe they've been diagnosed with bipolar, and they feel okay, maybe they're medicated, or maybe they're not even diagnosed, maybe they're experiencing some things right now that might be up that alley, or somebody says they have bipolar, their sister has bipolar, and so they think it's genetic, et cetera, et cetera. And they're listening to this stuff and they're like, what the heck, what does this have to do with spirituality? I guess
well, I think in the bigger picture, spiritual experiences like the one I had, or even things like psychedelic experiences, for example, people often report having spiritual experiences while on taking LSD and things like that, or peak experience that can happen even during sports, or different kinds of rituals. They give you a taste of this other dimension, but what you're doing with it is kind of the important thing. And I think that the spiritual dimension is just leading us towards an authenticity. You know, like I said earlier, it's not about being normal, it's being natural. You know, and so when people are healing, which is the focus of my work now, it's about becoming more open, spontaneous, and peaceful. You know, and present. Those kind of things. It's not about being this Tony Robbins kind of super god. You know, I was so productive last week. I slayed the world. It's like, congratulations, Mr. Ego Boost. I mean, it's not about that. It's about being really authentic and honest with yourself. And I think to a certain extent, healing is about kind of cleaning out the lies, cleaning out the bullshit we tell ourselves. Not just about other people or the lies we tell others, but the lies we tell ourselves, parts of us that are just not being honest with ourselves.
I want to expand into that more. So, because that resonates with my experience. I had a lot of things I was being dishonest with others about, and things I was being dishonest with myself, more importantly, about. And I found that, that was after a while, when you're dishonest, you have these layers that you begin to create almost accidentally of like these lies that you have to keep up with, again, whether it's socially or just inwardly, and then you kind of lose yourself in between. Is that something that you would say is fairly common with people who have these experiences? Is there some sort of external or internal lie that maybe even they're not even aware of? Maybe there's some childhood thing that happened that they're not really fully able to be truthful with in the moment. Is this common?
Right. Well, like the roots of the disorder is trauma. Okay. That's a big deal. And trauma in itself is kind of a lie, because it's taking a part of an experience that was so painful that we deny the emotion itself. Like,
Mm.
we just don't accept that happened. And the best example, I think, is when you see someone who's at the funeral of a loved one and they don't cry. And then they'll even ask themselves later, they'll say, I don't understand why I didn't cry. I loved him. And people go to therapy. Why didn't I cry at my father's funeral? And the reason is they're just so devastated that their psyche has just checked it out and said, no, we're not going there. And then it becomes locked into this bioenergetic system and can be a trauma that leads to a deeper disorder.
Mm. And so how does have you heard of or read the book, The Body Keeps the Score? You've heard of that one?
I haven't read it. I should read it really.
It's
But
always
yeah,
brought up, right? Yeah, it's always referenced.
yeah, it's always brought up. I just feel like it's like I know.
Yeah, you're going to be nodding your head during the entire book.
Yeah,
But
yeah, it's a huge book though, very influential.
yeah, I mean, I think it always just the book seems to be my doorway to the conversation about kind of I think of like our fascia, our myofascial system. I think it's kind of like a lot of our spiritual like postures with the world.
Okay.
I kind of wonder, so like how do you see trauma being stored? Is it stored in our physical
Right.
body? Is it held?
Yeah, I see it somatically, like it's in our bioenergetic system. You could call it a chakra system or Kundalini system. And incidentally, a year after my hospitalization, I went for rolfing, which breaks up the fascia tissue,
Hmm.
and when you do that, sometimes that does release emotions. And I did have some of that happen in particular.
Hmm.
Okay. Have you heard of rolfing? It's a
No,
very
I haven't.
it's a very intense massage where the focus is on kind of breaking up the fascia tissue, which and the fascia tissue is like what connects your bones together, I think. And once that's broken up, you just feel a lot more fluid and expansive. But it's been known that people will cry on the massage table from having this rolfing technique done to them. So for me, the trauma is carried throughout the body, particularly along the chakra line, but it can be in other parts. And
Mm.
so the key to healing is to work on that. The therapy should be somatic. It should be working with the body. And so in my second book, I talk about the private retreats that I set up. Took me a long time to figure it out, but by 2013, I started doing private retreats for people. And in those retreats, I was using a technique from Stan Grof, a derivation of the technique of holotropic breath work. And with holotropic breath work, you're over breathing in a very safe space. You're on a mat and yoga pants, and there's some powerful music playing, and you're with a trained facilitator, certified facilitator. You do this over breathing, and then when you do that, the unconscious comes up. And part of it is very physical. So there's a thing that happens called tatani where your whole body can lock up, your fists, your neck. And some people get so locked up they can barely even talk, right?
Mhm.
And they can go into panic. So it's good to remind people that this can happen beforehand. And they can be locked up there for like 30 minutes. And then the whole thing just relaxes and they feel more relaxed than they've ever had for their entire life. So
Mm.
this is just like a wave of mini traumas through the whole body that is just being released, the tension.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And so you've experienced it through myofascial release, and then so in your retreats that you set up, I know you've talked a lot about breath work, and you have developed your own. You kind of switched that into you have your own bipolar breathing. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, that's right. Well, holotropic breath work is a formatted thing because there's a million ways to do breath work.
Mm-hmm.
You can do breathing that's just like relaxation meditation. You can do things that are supposed to activate your Kundalini processes, pranayamas and things like that. But with holotropic breath work, you've got a safe space, trained facilitator, like I said, powerful music. It's a 3-hour session, generally in a group. It can be private, but also in a group. And that's the format. And that was contraindicated for people with deeper disorders because they were afraid that it might open up too much and the group setting or the limited time frame wouldn't be a safe enough container for someone who's dealing with more difficult issues like you might have if you've got bipolar or schizophrenia. So I said to myself, well, I'm not doing anything right now. How about if I start my own retreat? And that way I give people unlimited time frame and unlimited attention, just private attention. And I insist that they bring a volunteer. a volunteer supporter, so that I'm not on my own. I can get breaks while they can still be supervised. The family knows somebody's with them, so they know I'm not just some weirdo from the internet. Somebody from the family is sort of involved. Yeah, and then with the bipolar breath work, I just made a few adjustments, which is they can start and stop whenever they want. So if they just decide after 20 minutes, that's it, I say, okay, that's it, and we stop. And then we come back to it when they want. That's the first thing. And then there's the undivided attention, and I can also customize the music depending on where they're at. So they were the three of the big adjustments I made early on. And the results were incredible.
Yeah. So what are the kind of experiences that you saw people having?
Yeah. Well, to point out like the somatic aspect of this whole thing, which is Kundalini and the blocked energy. My first client had been hospitalized, I think about 10 times, and every year for about a month for 6 years. And when I went to work with her, she had a pain in her coccyx that was so bad, she couldn't sit down for more than 10 minutes and she couldn't lay on her back in bed. Right. And in the 5th breathwork session we did, she didn't move a muscle, very quiet. I thought nothing was happening. And then she came back and she told me hot energy came shooting out of her coccyx, up the spine, into the shoulder blades, down through the hands. And the pain that she had been to 6 medical doctors for, and they had no answer for her, the pain was gone, after 5 sessions. We knew right away, and synchronistically, we knew it was part of the disorder. I had suspected it. She had told me about the coccyx pain even before I went there. And when that cleared up, I thought she had been healed. Okay. I thought, I'm a genius. This is done. Here's my bill.
I'm Jesus now.
Yeah, I'm Jesus. Right. I'm Jesus. But she did have an episode a couple of months later. And I got on the phone with her. I said, I'm coming back to Romania. I live in Brazil. I'm coming back to Romania, and you don't need to pay for anything. And we did a second retreat the second year, 2014. And then she was meds free for 5 years. She was meds free for 5 years after that. So again, it was like she come in 2016. I met her again. I was in Romania 3 years in a row, synchronistically. And she came back, she visited me, and she said, Sean, I've been off my meds for a year. That hasn't happened since I was 20 years old, like 15 years, And she was able to remain off her meds for 5 years,
Yeah.
So, that she was my first client. And then after that, my next 2 clients in Germany and Finland had incredible success, and they're both completely out of the psychiatric system. No medications, no relapses for over a decade now.
Yeah, that's incredible. Okay, so bring in someone who I think you and I, it's not that shocking to hear. There's this physical pain in someone's body. It's at this area where we know it's like, okay, this is like maybe stuck energy in your root chakra. That'd be language that you and I would probably know. But someone else would be like, wait, okay, so you're saying this lady went in to 6 different doctors. She had pain that couldn't get solved. It was not on an X-ray anywhere, and she breathed and it helped.
Yeah. And then try to tell a psychiatrist that, the roots of her mental illness are spiritual and in her ass.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I give up. I can't do that, right?
Yeah. But clearly you've had success with it. So how do you break this down to people? How do you explain this in a way that people can wrap their heads around?
I made a lot of YouTube videos.
Sure.
A lot of YouTube videos, and I made and the books help. But what I learned on YouTube is that even though I'm talking about information that's pretty complex, you can take the ideas, and as long as you break them down into small pieces and give people things that they can relate to. Like one of my most popular videos that people still watch was like one about the spiritual delusions, and I called it is it bipolar disorder or spiritual enlightenment? And then I talk about the delusions that look like enlightenment. And I think I say, so whether you're a Buddhist monk going through this in a cave in Tibet, or you're a teenager in Chicago who just took some LSD, your experiences look pretty much the same. There's not. And funny enough, intensive meditation, going on a 10-day retreat, is a very common trigger for acute psychosis that gets people labeled bipolar, and then they're medicated for life,
Mhm,
So it's
mhm.
not just, oh, these kids are taking drugs and now they've ruined their lives and they're on these meds. It's very common drug use, but on the other end, intensive medication and meditation can bring the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, you had didn't you have a 10-day Vipassana experience? Didn't you have a spiritual experience on that?
Yeah,
Would you mind sharing?
I had one in 2009, and energetically it felt stronger than what put me in the psychiatric hospital.
Oh, wow.
Um, and it left, like, again, explosion at the heart chakra, all my organs shaking, vibrating, crying, but more tears of joy.
Mm.
But I was so shook up, and this is during the meditation, that I was afraid to walk back to my room because there was a hillside trail. And I thought that if I fainted, I might fall down the hill and never be seen again, this kind of thing. So, and I was basically in bed every morning for the next 5 days. And it was stronger in a Kundalini sense than what put me in the hospital. But by that point, I knew what I was doing. I had been around the work. It had been my mission for 3 years. So
Mhm.
when this Kundalini process unfolded, then it was like I was bit more ready for the whole thing. And
Yeah.
then the heart of the Kundalini stuff continued for the next 6 months. I'd be in bed with my wife, and then good night. Oh, like, oh, what's that? Just hot pins in my toes. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, just a Kriya, honey, don't worry.
Yeah. Is that what
Yeah.
they are? Kriyas?
Uh,
The Kriya is the prayer, right?
well, so Kriya, my understanding is Kriya is the involuntary movement. It is
Oh,
like the sudden, like you're in meditation and you can't really help, but anybody who's going through a Kundalini experience, especially if you're doing a lot of yoga too, you can't really help but like do all that kind of stuff. That's my
okay.
understanding of Kriya. I could be
Okay.
a little bit wrong on that, but
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No. And I still work with Kundalini processes to this day. I go through a lot of jerking.
mhm.
But for the first 6 months, it was quite uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, so where would you say that you sit with it now? After after this many years of it as your personal experience, where um like when someone comes in and they would like to know kind of your background of not only your experience with Kundalini and your spirituality and everything, what is kind of your explanation to them? Like, hey, I had this experience happen. Here's how I see it now. Because to me, you come across as very grounded with this sort of thing, and so I kind of wonder how you observe yourself or how you see others seeing you when you explain it.
Mm, well, I don't talk about it that much for regular people. I'm the kind of person, like, I look for the open door, or I look for people who seem to be looking for this kind of help.
Mm,
And then if they come to me, like a say you guy like you're very open, you're very receptive, and you're curious, and you want to know, right? But I don't stand on the street corner trying to tell everybody about what happened to me. Um, and when people say, "Oh, how do I convince my family to understand
mhm,
that what I went through is spiritual?" I tell them, I say, "Don't. Just look for someone who's open, or if someone comes to you and you put a few feelers out there and they're open and curious, sure, talk about it. But if not, just keep it to yourself, because people get threatened by this kind of thing. And
mm.
if you feel like they're not listening in the beginning, you're not going to change their mind. You're not going to change their mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I where I've come at with my experience with it is, yeah, I'm in that same boat. Like I don't go advertising it. Sometimes it's like I'll go many months without even talking about it with friends or whatever. And it's like, wow, it's crazy. This like very profound, to me, very important experience happened to me that changed the course of my life. But it's like I haven't even really thought about it much, whatever. But I'll note that it will come up in cool conversations where it feels natural, it feels safe, it feels that I can be useful to the person that I'm talking to. I actually had one time on a plane. I'm mostly an introvert in public on planes. I'm kind of just like to have my hood up, have headphones on, just kind of keep to
Mhm.
myself. I don't
Uh-huh.
typically dive into a bunch of deep conversations on planes, but I had one probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, where I started talking to this girl next to me. She was super super cool, super polite. And over the course of the time, it was like a 5 hour flight. I ended up learning that her sister had been going through basically psychosis. And she was like going through all these things. And I allowed this girl to tell me quite a bit before I even was like, well, here's kind of my thoughts if you're willing to hear, and I kind of tried to explain without, this girl had never heard, these terms Kundalini or, she doesn't use terms like chakra. I think she had like more of a Christian background. So, some of those terms in itself are, sometimes people can think they're demonic for some reason. But anyway, so I ended up a great connection. I gave her a lot of these resources. I was like, hey, check out this channel, check out this person. This could be all totally, just my perception, but maybe send your sister these, see what she thinks, maybe have a conversation with her. Maybe you could talk to your mother about these things, just to open up the conversation with your sister. And she seemed to be very, very grateful. And I was like, that was cool that I was able to, this stuff that I'm obsessed with, this stuff that I like learning about that happened to me, I'm able to kind of casually open up and potentially maybe I helped out that person's sister in some way of giving her some resources. So yeah, like I wasn't going about looking for like who wants to hear about my Kundalini awakening on this plane, but it just happens.
Yeah.
So.
And I will add though that over the last 18 years of doing this work, starting in 2007, now it's 2024, and I was making videos and I'm writing books and I'm doing retreats. There was often a tremendous sense of mission and that I hadn't finished my mission, and sometimes it would just bring me to tears, the frustration of just not getting where I needed to go, But then when I finished the second book here and, Bipolar Awakenings, The Quest to Heal Bipolar Disorder, at the end of the book, I was just like, I've done my part. It's like, if the world just wants to just forget about me at this point, I've done everything I'm supposed to do. And I there's a sense of relief to a certain degree. And then I created an online course, and then the relief got deeper. And so now it's like, well, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do, but I like to talk about it. So I've started to do more podcasts, and the curiosity is kind of over. I'm not in the research and development part of the work. I feel like I want to be just talking about the work instead of doing it at this point, like being a teacher instead of a therapist,
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's a good spot to be, man. I more and more people with the internet, especially, YouTube is such a cool thing, especially with, we live in this. It's not necessarily a social media algorithm. It's like a interest algorithm at this point, So somebody starts watching, they watch this one. We talk about Kundalini a lot, and now their algorithm's going to feed them more Kundalini type stuff, which I do think this could be another interesting part of our conversation, Sean. Is do you think that like philosophizing and reading about this content can cause a Kundalini awakening? Do you think contemplative?
Sure.
Yeah.
My videos have caused psychosis for people. Just watching my videos has caused like Kundalini awakening. You want to call it a Kundalini awakening? You want to call it psychosis? My website, like my book, it's called Bipolar Awakenings. So I kind of put in the paradox that this thing can cut both ways, It can be a blessing. It could leave you medicated for life, depending on how you deal with it.
Yeah.
So any information about this, reading a book, reading a spiritual text is a common, what I call a trigger. Common triggers are like death in the family. Going to university is a common trigger because you're changing is the most common trigger because you're changing cities. You're leaving your family behind. You're being exposed to people you've never been exposed to, people from different parts of the country, for example. You're typically not doing as well at university as you did in college. Like you're probably the top of the class in high school, then you're just one of the dregs when you get to university. You can be very challenged in the ego, and you might be doing a lot of drugs too. So you put all that together, it's a recipe for psychosis.
Yeah.
Or bipolar awakening. It's a recipe for bipolar awakening. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. Either way, your self will be challenged. Okay. Yeah. So where do you see the self? Where do you see identity? Do you think as a culture we should be reshaping the way that we interpret and talk about identity and ourselves in these things?
Wow, that's a deep question. I don't know if we're ready for that depth. What's your identity? That's kind of tricky, but you see, I think we're starting to veer there a little bit. You hear people talk, there's one place where it really comes up a lot. There's all of these fake videos on YouTube by they say they're the words of Carl Jung and they're the words of Alan Watts, But once you get past the fact that, well, it's not really Carl Jung and it's not really Alan Watts, and they're both dead. And so,
Yeah.
like, how is Alan Watts talking about social media? He died in 1973. There was no social
Yeah.
media, you know.
Yeah.
Once you get past that, though, and you listen to how they talk about life and living, and this thing that's even I'm just learning about, still a process of individuation,
Mm.
you know, where you're pulling your projections back from the world. You know, you're pulling back codependent relationships where you're looking for other people to fulfill you, you know, which is a typical marriage. You know, that's a codependent relationship is a typical marriage. But when you look at that, it's like, okay, it's natural, but maybe it's not optimal. Maybe there's another way to sort of come at it, you know. And I was divorced last year, and we had a very good marriage, I think, and we're still friends. But there was a part of it where I realized, whoa, hang on, like I've sacrificed a lot of myself by being in this marriage. There's a real codependency going on here, and I got to figure that out, you know.
Yeah.
So, and this year has been a lot of deep introspection and often very painful, and a lot of somatic movement and jerking through the chest, the belly, the hips, the neck, clicking. Anytime I would just sort of settle down and focus on my own emotions, it would be like my body would take on a life of its own.
Mm.
You know?
Yeah, it's almost like you gotta like physically embody who you're now supposed to become or something. Like you're, like physically
Yeah.
changing into who you are next or something,
And the weird and synchronistic part would be like I'd put on one of these like Alan Watts or Carl Jung videos on YouTube and listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that sometimes my body would spontaneously jerk on specific points, you know?
Right. Yeah.
It'd be like, this is what you're looking for. Jerk, you know? And it was
Yeah.
like, what is doing that? What is causing my body to spontaneously convulse on specific words in this video?
Yeah.
You know, it's a divine, and I should bring it up too. And you see it in the breath work, is the healing agent is actually a divine intelligence. It's a higher power. You can call it God. Could be aliens. It could be angels, but it's definitely a higher intelligence. And working with people on 10-day retreats, you see how it unfolds, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So how do you when you come across someone with a more atheistic background who like I said before, doesn't necessarily love all these spiritual words, doesn't really have a place in their psyche or understanding of who they are for kind of this divine being much larger than my lowercase me self. How do you navigate that with them? Like, are they able to, if you're able to describe like nature or the laws of nature, does that help with them to kind of penetrate
No.
that? Or
No, it doesn't help. And this is where the work of Ken Wilber really comes in. And Ken Wilber talks about the evolution of consciousness. All right.
yeah,
And one of the things he says is that the first stages of consciousness, like the first 6 stages, and we have 4 that are very common. The first 2 are very infantile, generally, or related to illness. And then the next 4 are pretty common. And they're all trying to get the other people to see the world the way they think. And the strongest example is when a religious person who is constantly trying to convert other people to their religion, But at the same time, the diversity crowd, the LGBTQ crowd, they do the same thing. I mean, if you don't see the world through their lens, the MAGA crowd, if you don't see the world through their lens, it's like, I don't know, you need to be deported.
yeah.
At
You're
this
the bad
point,
other. Yeah, you're evil.
Yeah. Yeah. So they will see different stages of consciousness will see the other person as evil or stupid, or like a sinner, or just something's very wrong with them, But at a certain, like once you realize the development's going on, your intention is to help people out. And so if somebody is, say for example, you got a former drug addict who goes to church every Sunday, and that's what's holding his life together. Beautiful. That's where he's supposed to be. Is he a racist? Sure, he's a racist. Let him be a racist. He's got bigger issues than his racism, because he's going to die if he leaves this church, But then other people are struggling with certain stages, like, well, maybe you're getting more rational and you're wondering, well, is Jesus even real? If you're having these kind of thoughts, or then you can introduce to them ideas that are a little more atheistic, because that will be an actual step forward. To get people thinking rationally is a step forward. But then what happens when people are atheistic is eventually they lose meaning in life. Like, what's the point of living? Existential angst is a very common depression for people with atheism, or like it's a disease or something. And I was one of those people. When I was atheist or agnostic, which is like where you scientifically believe that it's impossible to prove that God does or doesn't exist, I felt like I was in a lost world, man. I was just, I didn't know what to do with my life in my 20s. Call it depression. But then coming out of that atheism, if somebody is really in that existential angst, like if they're proud to be an atheist and they're successful and they're doing well and they're materialistic, good, let him go, let him do his thing. But if he's struggling, then you could say, well, what's your intuition telling you? Do you want to stay in your job? Do you want to live in this city? Do you want to stay in this relationship? And if the answers are no, it's like, well, then what is your deeper intuition saying? And once we tap into the intuition, then we're starting to follow like the inner voice of God, like this divine intelligence within, or in a bigger picture, even if you want to go way out there, the quantum field, like the quantum intelligence, because I'm a parallel universe guy at this point, So I think there's a whole bunch of Seans, there's one Sean that's a drug addict, and one Sean's a priest, and there's another Sean that's a doctor somewhere, and then I don't know what the hell I'm doing here, but it's pretty trippy, I can tell you that.
Another Ram Dass thing. He has this thing he always repeats, like, I'm in this one over here. How'd you get into that one over there? And he always says that. It's always really
something
funny.
like that. Something like that.
Yeah. But I like that though. Trying to find a way in their language that doesn't close them off. Because I find that a lot of people shut down with a lot of these words. A lot of these therapy speak and spiritual language and all of this stuff nowadays is it's not only a lot, but it's very like you said before, triggering. Like it's just a few sentences can really make someone lock up, and then you're not going to really get any progress with them.
Yeah, and everybody's on their own journey, and to a certain degree, as much as you want to help somebody, and I want to help a lot of people, but that journey does need to be respected. To the point where I'm just I think I'm more kind of nonchalant about what I'm doing now more than any other time. And in September, believe me, I wasn't, but I think I had some sort of a breakthrough of a sort after an extremely painful September. And then now it's more just like, oh, good, let's go to the beach, and just accept what's coming.
Yeah. Well, happy November to you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a better month. A better month. Yeah. Paradoxically, drinking a lot of beer lately, funny enough, it's like, I've been Mr. No Drinks, but I'm living in a town where there's just a lot of drunks in this town.
Yeah.
And I meet my friends on the weekend and we have some drinks, and I do it more to be social than anything else, but yeah.
I thought about two things lately, both alcohol, the liquid courage, as they call it, as well as small talk. I went through periods where I was very against both, and I thought it was so much cooler than small talk. And then I've really been thinking a lot lately these last few months of how great small talk really is to just, we're just kind of looking for a connection. It's not so easy to just dive layers deep with a stranger right away, and you don't always want that. It's okay to how do I find a way to just smile with another individual? And sometimes it's laughing about the silly traffic or the weather, and in that same realm, as much as alcohol has, it's a spirit, and it has all these negative things. If you deal with any sort of depression or bipolar, maybe alcohol isn't always your friend, but it's also, half a beer in, and I'm remembering how much I love this friend that I'm getting to have a conversation with, and just talking about whatever without it needing to be all spiritual and deep, and we're, laughing about fart jokes or whatever it is. You're connecting, right? Those simple things that at some point in your path you push away, they come back around.
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit synchronistic in my own process, because that you're saying this, because I'm a person who does not like small talk, like really. But now I'm living in a city by myself. I've got a few close friends. Well, I got a few friends here, and I'm learning that superficial conversation is just the way it's going to be, and you might as well enjoy it, you know?
Yeah.
And so I am more active about the small talk. How's the weather? You know, this kind of
Yeah.
thing. What are you doing this weekend?
Well, you kind of find, man, that this is kind of like a little bit corny, right? But you kind of find that you could still find a way to love someone without like your favorite language. You know, like I can go to if I'm on a road trip and I'm in Louisiana and I stop at a gas station and I can tell maybe the person's having a rough day or whatever. Maybe I don't even analyze their life at all. And I just have a quick little 2-minute conversation and it's kind of silly about whatever they were talking about. It has nothing they didn't learn about my deep knowledge of philosophy, or they didn't learn about my whatever thing that I think is going to bring me joy or happiness. But I walked away and I'm chipper as I'm walking out of that store, and they're smiling, whatever. You know, that's I don't know. That's
Yeah.
connection. You know,
It to tell you the truth, I think the best thing, like, because I live alone and sometimes I can get a little lonely sometimes. I
yeah,
think the best thing I can do for my own loneliness when it comes up is just get in an Uber. Book an Uber for like
right,
20 minutes, you know. I have great conversations with Uber drivers.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
they got nothing to do. They're driving around all day. And I've had some really fun, funny conversations with Uber drivers, both here in Brazil and in Canada.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I had a guy thank me the other day actually for talking to him because he was a little bit of a language barrier, and I could tell he probably gets a little frustrated
Oh,
trying to.
okay.
But you know, we were talking. It was a little clunky, but at the end, he was like, "Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me." I'm like, "Dude, of course! Like, I can't believe you just had to thank me for talking to you." You know. But
I remember I had an absolute nightmare of a retreat in India, in South India. Can't go into the details. It's in the book, but they threw me out. They got spooked by what I was doing, basically.
oh wow,
And they put me in this taxi for a 4-hour taxi ride back to the airport. And at one point, I just go, Raj, yes, sir. Do I seem like a bad person to you? He goes, no, sir. You are a cool guy, sir. Yeah, man. It was like Raj was my therapist in that moment, you know.
yeah.
Sorry
What
for
a
the
breath.
Indian accent. I had to do it.
No, I love it. I'm so glad you did. I'm a huge fan of comedy. I'm actually going to a comedy show tonight, so I'm
Oh, great.
in anywhere I could insert comedy into the conversation, I'm in, man. So thank you for it.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would love to talk a little bit more about Kundalini itself, if you don't mind. So,
Go
um,
for it.
I'm always, like I said since the beginning, I'm always kind of trying to bring along the person who's new. Maybe they're in the car ride, or they're with their significant other who likes my podcast and they don't really know. I'd like to like bring people aboard so they can feel like they're part of the conversation. You know as well as I do that Kundalini is it instantly feels very far fetched. It's like there's a energetic snake coming out of my butt. What are you talking about? But bring it back to kind of like this divine energy that is, within all humans, and it could be, activated, release. I think the best way to describe it seems cheap to those people when I say it, I feel, but I would say, like, Jesus had an awakened Kundalini. I would say the Buddha had an awakened Kundalini. I don't know these for a fact, but I think it's just a good way of explaining,
Could be.
like,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
were, again, not that us having Kundalini awakenings means that we're like now enlightened as just regular people or something, but I don't know. How do you demystify the word Kundalini, Mr. Blackwell?
How do I demystify it? Well, I like to start by saying that there was in like about the 1930s, there was a guy named Gopi Krishna in India, and he had dedicated his life to God and meditating every day. And then all of a sudden it started with him. And one of his symptoms was he just had this insatiable thirst. And no matter how much he drank, his mouth was always hot. He was always burning. That was one of his symptoms of his Kundalini process. Okay. My first client, Livia, she was dealing with the same thing. She called me a few months after one of our retreats. Sean, I'm just drinking water all the time. I can't get rid of this burning mouth, you know. Gopi Krishna at the time, he knew he was in some sort of a Kundalini process, and he knew that it looked very similar to madness. He contacted every guru he could get in touch with, every mystic guru in India that he was aware of, and there were a lot. He couldn't find a single one that had had a Kundalini experience.
Wow.
Okay, we're talking about Indian mystics in 1935. These experiences are very common now for completely untrained people. Okay. Regular teenagers having Kundalini experiences. They don't know what's going on, but sometimes they just follow their intuition and spontaneously start to move with this stuff to sort of unlock it, and other people become afraid of it, So what to make of it? I think that we are in a bigger kind of a global awakening of some kind. Groff was big on the astrology of the whole thing. And I think that, and this gets woo-woo, okay? This does get woo-woo, but I think that there's just a need for authenticity that's happening now in our world that earlier generations never thought to go to, even with their most intimate partners, Like you and I are having, I think, an incredible conversation, which I have not had with, I could probably count on, my fingers, how many times I've had a conversation where I felt someone you so just with me and real, Because for the most part, that authentic connection, I think you're better off trying to find that with your cat than with, a family member or something like that. So there's there's a demand for authenticity. And one of the things that's coming up, I'm sort of meandering around the question, but
Please do. You're great. Yeah.
Where we met on Podmatch, there's all kinds of Podmatch profiles of a bunch of different podcasts. And the one word that keeps coming up in everybody's podcast profile right now is the word raw. Everybody's saying, oh, this is the place for raw conversation, raw, unfiltered, raw, unfiltered. And almost to the point where it's kind of a joke. But people, I think maybe it's because of the AI coming in, are getting brittle against inauthenticity. They want real life experience. They want real connection. And to have that, you do need to get more honest with yourself, and therapy can help, but I don't know. I think there's a lot online that can help these days as well. And it's an introspective movement. And once you start to get introspective, the Kundalini is just going to pop, eventually. It's going to show up in different ways, and you're going to realize it eventually, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Wouldn't that be wild if all the podcasters just start having Kundalini awakenings?
Well, it's a different kind of conversation you have as a podcaster too, because you guys are having, and I've done some podcasts too, but it's like, okay, here we are, 60 minutes, just me and you, uninterrupted,
Yeah. How often do you do that?
Not too often.
Yeah.
Not too often. Yeah. About things you're genuinely interested in, So it's a very different kind of thing. I'd feel more connected to you, for example, than I would my neighbor that I see every day, that I see physically every day.
Yeah.
I've never had a conversation like this with him.
Yeah.
We talk about the women at the beach. We talk about the drunks. We talk about some gossip about the neighbors, and that's our thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like what's around us right here,
Yeah.
You don't get too ethereal or too meta or too, bird's eye systems thinking.
No. And I have fun with this guy. He's a great guy.
Of course.
Yeah. But it's not like this. This is a whole other, this is a kind of a conversation that I think can inspire people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. I mean, that's why I like to do them. Obviously I love them too, but I like to think that I keep referencing like the listener, when I first started, me starting this podcast years back was kind of at, not like the height of it, kind of on like the decline of my kind of awakening. And I had been listening. I started basically, I wanted to solve all my childhood trauma. I wanted to fix everything that was broken about me, And so I just went to town with excavators and shovels and everything about my psyche and my insides. And I really just tore it up. And I was really, pretty loosey-goosey for a little while. And I was listening to podcasts and I was just learning so much. And I listened to audiobooks and I'm taking notes and I'm just unraveling, learning so much. And it was so fun and so great and so awesome. I felt like a new person every day. I'm just shedding layers, right? And I would hear things on a podcast, like a couple dorky comedians talking about whatever. In 2 hours and 13 minutes in, this one guest would say this one sentence that would just I have to pause it and I have to sit down, and it just changed me. And I've never heard anybody talk like that, especially like a man in this instance, whatever. And so I would notice how just casually listening to podcasts would profoundly change me, And so that was a lot of the reason why I started doing the podcast and things too. So, I'm sure I'm not the only person in that boat, And so isn't that cool to think that we're all changing one another by sharing our personal conversations and other people could listen in on them?
Yeah, I've never thought about that before, but certainly people listening to authentic, raw conversation is going to have implications for real life. It's because people will start to be more authentic in their daily lives with their friends and things like that. They're going to want to open up. They're going to want to reveal themselves more. And it's self-revelation. And as you peel back those layers, then all of a sudden you get the tweaks and the burning and the heart palpitations and the leg twitches and all that kind of goofy stuff, the pins in the toes and all those Kundalini symptoms.
All the fun, exciting stuff. Okay, well, I want to be respectful of your time, Sean. We are getting towards the end here. So say someone is interested in this, they love all that you've said, they're going to go check out your websites and everything. What's not only new on the horizon for you? Bipolar Awakenings is your most recent book there. Firstly, this is probably a hard question to ask an author, would you recommend your first one or your second book if you had to choose one as their first intro to your work?
Oh, good question. If you don't know me, then the first one. It's an easy read. It's a 2-day read, right?
Oh, nice.
Yeah. The second book, after every chapter, you need to sit down.
Yeah.
You just need to be like, did this really happen? Oh my God.
Wow.
And you just need to go and digest and take a break. And it's annoyingly deep and detailed. And I love it. It's, for my money, it's better than the Bible, but that's just my own unbiased opinion,
Sign me up. Sounds good, man. Sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Okay, so they'll check out your newest book, or maybe dive into your older teachings.
Sure. Both are free PDFs on my website, bipolarawakenings.com.
Well, they're both free PDFs. That's amazing. That's cool that you offer that.
Yeah, and I've got some online therapeutic approaches that I use too. We haven't had time to get into it, but that's something we bring up. I also do a free 30-minute consultation for people.
Can I don't want to rush past it. We do have a few minutes. What can you tell me a little bit more about your online courses? What do you offer? What can they get into?
Well, on my retreats, I learned that I was picking up the unconscious materials of my client, like their pain.
Oh, that's
stuff
right. I actually had notes about this. I did want to ask about this. So yes. Yeah,
okay. Well, and so to make a real long story short, with the help of one of my clients who became a supporter, Monica Kettler, I always have to give her credit too. We realized that we were picking up unconscious material from the clients, and that having us breathe on behalf of the client, actually going into the client's pain, really strengthened the retreat process.
Yeah.
Because, for example, I've got tons of experience in breath work and it's not my pain. So if I'm breathing on your behalf, I can go into things that you're not ready for, That became standard part of our retreat process. First, my client would breathe and then I would breathe after that. Then I learned, guess what? This works at a distance. I can do distance work like this. And that's a long story I get into in the book. But so I have a thing called distance surrogate breath work that I can do on people's behalf. And basically, it's a 2-hour session where I'm listening to breathwork music and twitching and twerking, working out whatever I feel is going on. And then the client will have some sort of synchronistic material so that they know that I'm working on them. Most of the time, it's dreams that come afterwards where they know it's their material. They just know that this is about their life. Like
Mhm.
last week, I had a dream about having to apologize for my criminally oriented brother, and this guy had a brother who had been to jail. That kind of thing. It could also be visual things that pop up during the session, although that's less common these days, and sometimes physical sensations and sometimes simultaneous physical sensations. So I was in a session with a guy from New York, and at about the 20-minute mark, my arms just snapped right out at their sides.
Huh.
And when I finished the session, I got a text from him, man, my arms just snapped right out of my sides.
Whoa.
Like crazy stuff happens where it's like, you're connected, So, and if you don't, I'm open to return people's fees. So that's something that I do for people. And I also have a training program where if people have a supporter, I'm open to teach the right people how to do breath work in their own home if they've got someone who's willing to learn the training with them. So far, I've had no takers, but that's there too.
Yeah.
So
I guess we'll see.
Yeah. I keep trying to make the work cheaper and more accessible, but keeping it safe as well,
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So I'm sorry. I keep having more questions come. How do you and Monica, how do you, I don't want to say protect yourself, because that sounds like, how do you not only stay sane and protect yourself, I guess, but how do you, like, once you notice, okay, this is not only this is not my energy to work with, now let me transmute it. But how do you even get to the point where you can decipher your intuitive, like the things you're working on versus other people's energy? How do you?
Well, the first thing is that while it's with me, it feels like it's my own, and so I just treat it like it's my own and go through it as if it's my own material. But then once I look at the content and I look at how I feel later, it's pretty clear that it's the client's material, because when it's your material and you work through it, like this is your own unconscious material surfacing. When that happens, it leaves a lasting impression with you. And sometimes you need to sleep on things, you need to think about it. For example, if you had some anger come up, you might feel angry after the session, for example, that kind of thing. But when it's somebody else's material, it just passes through you like energy, even if it's angry or shameful or birth related. And you just look at it and you go, it's like you're watching the whole thing happening. It's moving through you. And you don't have any ego in the game. That's another part of it. It's being done by the quantum field. The inner healer is actually a healing field that is sending that energy to you to process. Right. So you're just acting like a servant or something. You're just cleaning whatever's coming your way. That's it. So if you think, I'm the big guru and I'm going to heal you, that's not going to happen, because there's too much ego in the picture. You need to genuinely want to do this for people and want their best needs at heart, and you just filter it through like it's your own stuff.
Yeah, I love that.
Really
I love that
easy, actually.
Yeah, I love that I was able to ask that, because I had a lot of struggles. I think probably a lot of people who go through this stuff would consider themselves somewhat of empathic, in some ways sensitive at the very least. And I went through a lot of struggles of absorbing other people's energy, and it was very confusing to me for a while. And it took me a while to kind of like feel when I'm grounded in my own body, and feel when I'd be at times where I could have like just walking by someone, I would suddenly be like distressed and whatever. And instead of launching off into my solving intellectual mind of like, why is my life like this and what am I doing and blah, 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 I just kind of allow it. And then within a few seconds, it's like it passes through and I go, oh, I don't even have to solve that. That wasn't mine to solve. It just passed through, which is so strange, right? But I think it's a useful thing to learn how to do.
Sure. And and things have happened to me on the street, like just by accident, walking by somebody, and then all of a sudden I have a feeling for a situation, and then all of a sudden, whoa. Like, I've kind of got to be open and compassionate, but it's generally quite spontaneous. It's not like I'm walking around, in white robes or anything like that. It's just,
give me your bad
vibes.
Yeah,
congratulations, you've got bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
No, it just happens. I just deal with it, and that's it. It's common. There have been supporters who've come on my retreats. They just really care about the person. We had a girl on one retreat, 23 years old, no experience with my kind of psychology. And then she was falling asleep during her boyfriend's session at 10 o'clock in the morning. Normally, when I'm absorbing energy from a client, I'm getting really drowsy. Really, it's like it's a magnet that sucks you in, right? It was happening to her. So I said to her, "Do you want to breathe?" Afterwards, the session was over. She says, "Yeah." She starts to go into her boyfriend's birth process. Next thing you know, she's like, I have to simulate a uterus for her, and she's got her head going through my arms, and then like I'm hanging on to her, and she's struggling out of my grip, and I've got to hang on down through the hips and the legs and the feet, like she's being born. And then I said to her, I said, "Did you have any sense that that was something related to your life?" And she was like, "No, that was fun."
What?
She just,
What a trip.
yeah. Yeah. And it was her boyfriend's birth material.
Yeah. I mean, talk about codependency.
Yeah. She had no training at all. None, you know. So I was like, wow, if she can do this surrogate work, then anybody can do it for anybody if they've got the empathy. And she did. She had the empathy.
Yeah, I mean, wow, how incredible is that? I mean, and I think, like you already stated, I think a lot of us have discovered especially since 2020, how we are able to do those sorts of things virtually too. You know, we're able to not only through video Zoom calls, but like you said, if you and the other person are both aware that, hey, this is what we're going through at the same moment together, it really does. I mean, wow, we have so much to learn about the capacity and capability of the human mind and how it integrates with physical reality, right?
I had a call once with a girl where I was explaining how the psychic material comes. And I said, suppose, for example, I'm working with you and I see a red violin. And then that might be something related to your life. And then I said, do you play violin? And she's like, yeah, I play violin. I grew up playing the violin. This is my favorite instrument. I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Okay. You know, these kind of things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, they're like little crumbs from our greater selves, or crumbs from the universe, or something. You know, synchronicities. I don't know. I love that humans are always discovering more about ourselves as we heal ourselves. We're really learning and remembering who we really are. You know, it's as we're learning more, we're almost unlearning and remembering who we already are.
Seems that way. Yeah. Still mysterious. Still frustrating. You know, I still don't know how I'm going to pay my bills this month. But
you and me both, brother.
It's been quite a ride, though. So
yeah. We're all just walking each other home, eh?
I hope so. I really hope so. Oh yeah.
All right, Mr. Sean Blackwell. Well, I would love to just give you one more opportunity. If there's anything that is at the edge of your mind, or something that we didn't mention that you kind of wanted to bring up, any bows to tie, anything like that, I just wanted to give you that opportunity, or anything that you would like to leave the guests with.
No, man, I think it's been a terrific conversation. I think we've pretty much said all that needs to be said on this. Obviously, you and I could go back and forth for another 10 or 20 or 200 hours, I think.
Easily, 100%.
Yeah. But if anyone's interested in my work, you can access everything at bipolarawakenings.com. Both books are free PDFs there. There's a link to my YouTube channel, the whole bit.
Okay. Yeah. Listeners, you'll check out those links below. If you want to check out some more Sean, you'll have everything you need down below. And man, if you write more, or you work on some more projects in the past and you'd like to have another conversation, I would love to have you anytime, Sean. So please just reach out anytime, buddy.
Wow, that's great. And if I'm in Austin, I'll definitely look you up.
Yeah, that would be excellent. All right, man. Well, hey, I'm wishing you the best. Thank you again so much for your time. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Listeners, you know the drill. What I always say at the end of every episode: drink some water, stretch, love yourself, slow down, and subscribe. We'll see you next episode. Knowledge is power.
Reality is... Junkyard Love Podcast.